Hello, everyone. Today I'm with Bayo Akomolafe, and Bayo is author, public intellectual, teacher, philosopher, and we are going to speak about, well, firstly, welcome, Bayo.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
Bayo, I'd love to chat to you about, as we move along, about this time and how we can navigate through this interesting time that we live in.
Right.
But I thought if we could just start. I was listening to a YouTube recording the other day, and I heard that you were a university lecturer, you were a Christian, and I was just a little bit interested in starting from there, maybe. Like, how did you, well, it seems that you moved away from Christianity along
Mhm.
the way. So how did that all happen?
Well, I think in some sense it might be more accurate. Accuracy is not a huge theme in my thinking, but it might be more accurate to say that I moved away from the church. Um, and I know that it's it's maybe a little bit difficult for people to parse between Christianity as a religious enterprise from the institution that embodies it, right? But I grew up in a church. I grew up listening to pastors, and at some point along the line in the Imperial March to Heaven, I I heard a Phil Collins track, and I changed my mind. I'm just kidding. Um, but along the way, I started to ask questions that I felt were vital to the faith that I was in. You see, I was wrestling for a kind of spaciousness that was emerging with my sense of beauty. Right? And I couldn't really intelligently meet the frameworks that were presented to me. Um, I couldn't accept it. I couldn't accept that if one believes in a certain way, because I was already calling into question this idea of believing. And because I was, of course, exploring psychology as an undergrad, I was um, thinking very, very seriously about cognition and other aspects of human functioning. And then I was led to believe, because I actually, was studied in a Christian university. I was habituated into thinking that believing that if I believed in a certain way, regardless of evidence, regardless of the stuff that was presented, regardless of my cultural entrainments, um, then I would be saved. And and others who could not come to believe in that way, their contexts, their cultural and historical entrainments notwithstanding, they would be damned to eternity, to hell for eternity. And so I wrestled with these ideas. In fact, my number one dream at the time, I was just telling my daughter 3 days ago that I didn't want to become a psychologist or a public intellectual. My dream was to become a Christian apologist in the mode of a C.S. Lewis,
Right.
right?
Mm.
C.S. Lewis,
Mm.
Chronicles of Narnia. He was my dream, role. I wanted to give reasons. Of course, my daughter said, "Does that mean you apologize to people every day?" I had to explain to her what the apologist does. He doesn't say sorry, but he gives reason for his faith. And so this is what I was going to do. But then it seemed like the more I leaned or I navigated through the seriousness of my faith, the playfulness of my faith, the historicity of my faith, I could not stay within that encampment. I could not stay within that playground. The universe was larger than faith. The universe was larger than believing. And so I kind of walked away. But my walking away is not what I would term an abandonment. I don't believe abandonment is possible in an entangled universe. I
Mm.
believe we're all connected even beyond the things that we say we believe, right? This is actually the instigation here, that the lives do not turn on the cognitive perception or the cognitive convenience of believing that we are enraptured and indebted and entrained with and entangled with forces that are larger than these ideas of what you believe and what I believe. And so, yes, that's one way that I like to story that.
Yes. And was there like a day though when that happened? Was, you know, did
No.
just the penny drop, or it was over time?
No, no, looking back, I can't even draw the line where it happened. It feels like what's that thought experiment about if you take a, a a grain of sand and you add another grain of sand. Now you have 2 grains of sand, if you can manage it, and you add 3 and 4. At what point do these grains of sand become a heap of sand? Right? When it's 10, when it's 11, there is no easy way to demarcate between, a compost heap and a grain of sand. It's at some point it shifts. And I think the shift happened for me that way. I just found that my footsteps leading to the church, which was a foreboding and always immediate presence. Again, I grew up in a Christian community. I went to a Christian university. I taught in a Christian school. I did my BSc, my MSc, my PhD in a Christian community with the biggest church auditorium in the world in that community. 50,000 people. It's now about 100,000 people in a single building, right? And I was close to the leadership. So I had the church right there in my face, the greatest embodiment of the institution, architecturally speaking, at the very least, in my face every morning. And I had to ask questions about this. So it didn't happen in a day. It was more like a leakage. And then I just looked back and I found I was somewhere else. Yeah.
And it seems to me like when I first started listening to you, I thought, wow, this is like, hell cool, as my daughter would say. But what's Bayo doing? And then when I heard you speak about the trickster, you meet the trickster down at the crossroads, I thought, well, listening to you is a little bit like meeting the trickster down at the crossroads. And somehow, you make those openings, and through language or whatever, it's like somehow. If you've got fixed ideas or accepted wisdoms or something, it's like, through the language, there's those openings to look at things, But did you always have that? I mean, did that emerge in you later, or did you have that when you were a little kid? Or
I really don't know. I cannot tell. I've been posed, every time I get this question, and I get it almost all the time. It's like 100% guarantee. Now, I'm always at a loss for words because I'm not exactly sure how to respond to it. I don't really subscribe to the idea of an author, a stable self, that has these properties intact. I sometimes like to call attention to cultural training or maybe my readings, but that feels like I'm just grappling for something. I'm looking for an explanation where it doesn't serve at this point. Yeah.
Maybe we could just talk a little bit about, or could you talk around a little bit about the trickster energy at this time?
Yes. Yes. So I think the trickster anthropomorphizes this collective recognition that there are hidden tendencies that bestride or sidle our claims to arrival and settlement. That every time you might put it this way, you might think of it as the silver lining, you might think of it as a precipice, you might think of it as an edge. If you're a flat worlder, You might think that this is the place where the entire planet dips into a waterfall into the cosmos. But it's an edge that there is a critical edge that haunts our claims to reality, our claims to ontology, our claims to being, our claims to life. And that this thing, this trick of a thing, this idea is how things come to be. It's monstrous. We don't like it. We push it out. We do our very best to leave it at the edge or at a crossroads. The Yoruba people are famous for keeping their trickster issue at a crossroads. You don't bring issue into the house, right? You keep him at the doorway, right? So this idea of thresholds and intensities and densities that lurk and linger and haunt our space, and that every moment we claim that we have it figured out and that we are good, or that we know what life's about, this energy kind of visits us. So the trickster seems to be the thing that simultaneously makes the world and ends it. Right? Lewis Hyde famously said, the title of Lewis Hyde's book is Trickster Makes the World, I think. Trickster Makes the World. I haven't finished reading it, but the idea of the trickster being the creator and the destructor, or the destroyer, is very present. So let me tell a brief story about from two trickster traditions. I was in Estonia last year with my family. I was very fascinated to know that Estonia is probably the most animistic European country at the moment, right? They still have very strong ties to their folklore and traditions. I learned from one of their most popular philosophers, the story of Vanapagan. Now, Vanapagan is a grandfather figure kind of trickster. And when the world was created, Vanapagan, with the grandfather god, had this kind of tussle. So the grandfather god created the world as a flat line and was pleased with his mathematically precise creation and was like, I'm done. This is it. He can't get better than this. And Vanapagan kind of struck a deal, about making it better. And that the way to do this was for both of them to go to both ends of this line and to try and stretch it out, I think, even further. And they did this, but Vanapagan went back on his own word and he actually pushed the line in, right, instead of stretching it out. And that is how the dips and curves that allows for life actually emerged. That's how mountains and valleys and rivers and oceans and life actually emerged. In the same vein, the Yoruba people will tell the story of Eshu, hearing two lovers, declaring to themselves their love eternal. And he's doing his hands like this. Okay, let's see what commitment looks like. And then, because these two lovers in this story are divided by a single road, and they come from either side of this road, the villages on either side of the road, Eshu, paints his body black on one side and white on the other side, and he simply walks down the road, just walks down this road, does nothing else, and waits on the other side to see what happens. A mother from this side comes out and greets her neighbor on the other side of the road and says, my neighbor, how are you doing this morning? I'm good. Everything good with your family and your sister? Everything's good. Did you see that stranger, that white man that just walked past us a while ago? I think around 6 a.m. in the morning. No, I think you're mistaken. He was black. He was a black man, not a white man. Are you telling me that I don't have eyes? I saw him with my own eyes. He was a white man. No, he was a black man. The end of the story is that they defeat each other in war that escalates from that simple argument, including the lovers on both sides, right? Eshu destroys, but Eshu also creates, right? So the trickster is this intensity, this threshold, this reminder that settlement, morality, ontology, aesthetics, being is indebted to its edge.
Is it a little bit like Hermes, Mercurius in Greek?
Yes.
And
Yes.
who would it be
Method.
in India, Bayo? Because I know you spent time.
Mm.
Sometimes I remember, you know, the dancing Shiva, Natraj.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes. Yes.
you know, dancing.
Yes.
Do you think?
Yes. Yes. I don't. It might be. I think Shiva as I was thinking Kali a while ago, but Kali doesn't strike me as a trickster, except her shape shifting into this destroyer. That might come across as trickster. I don't know if there's a designated trickster, but Shiva does come across because Shiva is the god of dust as well, and dust in its unsettled settling or settled unsettling, speaks about the indebtedness we have to the world around us. Dust we came from, dust we should return to. So dust is the critique of being, you might say. And dust is always a mycelial, multi-vocal, and polyvocal federation of multiple beings. That feels like what a trickster might be excited about. So yes, maybe Shiva.
So we like to think, in my language, ego, willpower, moral code, rationality. That's the way to get ahead, kind of thing. That's how we were trained, wasn't it? But all
Upstairs, go upstairs. Just 1 second. 1 second, Joe.
When mom is upstairs.
My son is autistic, so he comes in once in a while, and that's it.
Yeah.
Pardon me. You can cut that part out.
Yeah, so I was kind of saying, we like moral codes, don't we? And certainties and belief structures and all that, but the trickster's always there, it seems to me.
Yes, yes. I think that I think of, here's something that might feel helpful. I think of ethics as connected with, but not disentangled from morality. So ethics and morality are different and differentiating, not different in a final ontological way, but differentiating. Ethics to me is the erotic flow of desire. It is material, and it's how the world comes to change and meet itself over and over and over again. It's how things come to matter. Morality, on the other hand, is a configuration of ethics. You see, we don't live in ethics. We live in moral spaces. Bodies need organs to be bodies, to produce, right? So morality is like ethics with organelles. And we live there. It's just that morality can often become, it's a holding pattern. Morality, you can consider it a holding pattern. Our ideas of what's good, what's bad, what's justifiable, what's not, all of these are practices. There's no idealized outside, right? We are practicing together with ecology. We're negotiating, we're speculating. This is the experimentality, you might say, that is the real, the actual. But it is often the case that morality can, as a holding pattern, can become asphyxiating. There's a very nuanced space, an infra-thin space between an embrace and a choke, right? So sometimes the moral structures we're in start to choke us.
Yeah.
And I think it's in those spaces, those times, when cracks start to emerge, because as the tensions increase, the cracks also become fierce. And the crack, I think, is the first sign, the first responder to a crisis, right? It's the first sign of the trickster's arrival.
Mm.
Yes.
And the crack is like opening into the new. And maybe that leads us to the next part, Bayo, which is
Yes.
you sometimes speak about post-activism because
Yes.
uh, sometimes it seems to me, like I've been thinking a little bit lately that um, sometimes activism is a direct challenge, isn't it? Or it can be a little. It seems to me a little bit dogmatic sometimes. That
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
even though activism does speak truth to power, and
Yes.
but uh, what are you talking about when you talk about post-activism? What do you mean?
Well, first, by that, I'm trying to draw attention, perhaps not as successfully as I hope I would, but I'm trying to draw attention to the idea that action, agency is not primarily or fundamentally a human property. It is not a human characteristic. We don't have agency. Agency is ecological. It is it's the intelligence of a territory, right? And just in the same way that to make this fist, to make this fist and to make my arm this way, um, some neurons have to fire, right? And some have to be inhibited. So they're excitatory neurons and inhibitory neurons. If they fired all at once, then my hand would be catatonic, right? But some have to be, some have to be quiet and some have to be loud in order for things to work. Agency works that way, I think. Agency has never been, this essentialized globular property that humans just happen to have. We don't have the scepter of it. Instead, we are in response. We're constantly trafficking boundaries and intensities with furniture, with intensities, with trauma, with color, with architecture, with food, with lives, all of that. We're constantly doing that. And that environment becomes agential. So I think of ecologies and assemblages and networks as agential, not humans, right? Humans participate in agential fields, right? Not that they are the primary owners of agency. And what this means is that we can now start to look at agential fields and what they're producing. What are the practices here? What realities and structures and possibilities are emerging in this field, and what is excluded or flattened or cleared out or obscured in this agential field. So by post activism, I'm not saying post the activist. I'm not saying after the activist. I'm trying to say that action happens in an aesthetic, ethical, moral, ontological, and epistemological framework. And that sometimes the ways that we respond to the critical events around us only becomes a resuscitation of those problems. Then we're in a very unique place. We might tell ourselves, for instance, that the thing to do now is to persist, that climate chaos is a thing. And if it's a thing, then we should do our very best to save the planet. And how do we do this? We reduce carbon emissions. How do we reduce carbon emissions? We kind of motivate ourselves to do so. And we put in a lot of money and ads and political currency in trying to educate people about the facts and also to motivate them to be good, conscientious folks. But then a broader look would invite us to notice that turning off the lights doesn't quite do as much as we think it does. Or sending your neatly discarded trash to a green emerald city where it is hopefully recycled and sent back to you as a green product doesn't quite work the way you think it does. So sustainability and those ideas, while idealized and maybe possibly laudable, actually work as waste colonialism and racialized capitalism and extractivism. So they're doing the very opposite of what they claim to be doing. beneath the surface of our righteousness, right? So we are in a very unique territory when choice doesn't behave in the ways that we expect it to do, right? Choice is supposed to be this differentiating factor. We choose because we want to have different outcomes. You're not going for Coke this time. You're going for Pepsi. You're not going for Trump. You're going for Biden, right? But what if Trump and Biden are part of the same horseshoe? Or what if Coke and Pepsi, while seemingly different in branding, give you the same kind of cancer, right? So the post-activism that I speak about is when something disrupts the field of agency, when a new consideration, a monstrous eruption, recalculates and recalibrates the field of motion, right? It could be, when I speak about a crack, I'm speaking about the monstrous. It could be on an autistic child. It could be the emergence of AI. It could be any of those things. It could be something that just changes the modalities, radically transforms the factors so that we cannot proceed in the ways that we're used to. The coronavirus is an example. Something steals into the economy, into our considerations of politics and who the politician is, and it upsets everything. And that is, and I have to say that when I speak about cracks, I'm centralizing that in my theorization of post-activism, but I do not mean to say that something spectacular needs to happen before we have conversations about post-activism. Cracks are not necessarily spectacular. We don't need an alien civilization to dip through the clouds in order for us to have these conversations. Cracks are always attending us, syncopating our bodies. I'm using musical jazz terminology. We're constantly being syncopated, alive to other differences, fighting for edges or new thresholds. And this is how agency changes.
So Bayo, that brings us to this interesting time that we live in.
Yes.
What have you been thinking about lately? How do we navigate through this time?
Well, I've just given a few examples. I'm in the United States at the moment, though we live originally, my family and I, we live in India.
Yeah.
But we're here for a couple of months. A couple of hours ago, I think, about 4 hours ago, Donald Trump was convicted.
Oh, it happened.
Yes, it happened. Yes, he's been convicted on all 34 counts. Right. He's been found guilty. Now, the American political system is in a unique, very historically seminal moment, because a former president is now a criminal, legally speaking. No longer allegedly, but he's now a criminal, and might be going to jail or not. We don't know how this is going to pan out. But something is alive in the atmosphere, something that probably gave birth to the movie. I haven't watched it, but gave birth to the recent movie called Civil War.
Right? I just saw it a couple of days ago.
Oh, you saw it before me, John. I need to go check that out. I hear it's good. But there's something alive in the zeitgeist. The sense that all is not well with the union, and maybe some have always sensed this, that all is not well with the union. I start out from Donald Trump and Biden, not only because I'm here, but because of the status of America in world politics. But there's something else, or something just as connected, that is afoot, a sensuous plot that I cannot quite lay my hands on, but it kind of reminds me of the feelings that Americans around me are sensing or feeling with regards to this incident. This doesn't feel new at all. It is surprising because we talk about it as if it was surprising, but it seems everyone had always anticipated this. This idea of something in the air that is unsettling our accounts of the world, that maybe with AI, we are not fully our own selves, and we may need to constitute ways of trusting each other again, other than the surface trust performances that we're used to. It seems like we're in new territory, alien territory, right? I think of this as, again, using the figure of cracks as this emergence and eruption of monstrous qualities. A little thing about the monster, I don't consider the monster as the bad guy, the evil thing. I mean, you could use language in that way to designate the monster as evil or pathological, but that's not how I want to use the monster. I want to think about the monster as the desensitizing interruption. If we think about ourselves as participants in a sensorial field, we understand the world in particular ways through certain dynamics. We think about our lives, what's successful, what's not successful, through certain dynamics. Now, something erupts through this field and disappoints all our calculations. This is what the monster is for me. It's all the things erupting right now. Coronaviruses, injustices at different level, genocidal patterns in the Middle East. All of this is erupting now. Now, the thing we...
Violent polarizations.
Violent polarizations, yes.
And
so that
some people might say, Bayo, though, that this is, well, I might say that in this dying, and maybe, after the rational enlightenment and maybe modernity and so much, but maybe what's wanting to be born, and this is where I'm finding I'm getting a lot from Indigenous cultures at the moment, reading about different Indigenous cultures, is this return to the sacred, or another understanding of the cosmos, or that the world that is alive, that speaks to us, that it's kind of like bringing something back from Indigenous culture. If I could put it that way, I don't know whether that's quite the right way to say it, but it's the return of the sacred. Or, it seems to be something that a lot of people, to be on one side or the other doesn't seem quite comfortable anymore. It's like something else is needed. I mean, what do you think about that?
I mean, okay, I'll address that. In the story I'm storing, it kind of speaks to that. But I'll just say this, that I'm a little bit wary about and shy about using the language return of the sacred. I would rather speak about disruption as the sacred, right? Because there is usually this tendency to fetishize, maybe indigenous worlds and cultures and rituals. We fetishize it and we productivize it and we make it this stable thing that we left behind. And if we were only there, things would be harmonious, as if nature is essentially fundamentally harmonious. And if we're in some kind of relationship with it, everything will be perfect. It will be utopian. But there is a sense in which culture gets lost and it gets born. It gets lost and it gets born again, right? And that maybe the thing is not to get back to that, as if, time is just a record stamp of stable events and stable practices. I think that this disruption is how the sacred, invites itself. That the disruption is sacred. Not that the sacred is something that's trying to get in, but that the sacred is disruption. The sacred is the refusal of our lives to be named by one name, right? Modernity is the attempt to name us by one name, right? And even that is a performance of some notion of the sacred. But because the sacred is multiple and polyvocal and never fully itself, all by itself, something about this time is, recalibrating our bodies for something different. Is this something different necessarily better? I don't think so. I don't think the world is a progress towards harmony or something like that. I don't think in terms of those Comtean philosophies that we're heading towards the light. Instead, I think we're in an open-ended experimental multiverse that is indeterminate, that is awkward, and it's feeling for things, it's experimenting. So it may not feel utopian to lots of people, but this is how I think about these times, that eruptions are happening and our patterns have been to level out these monsters. I think it's time to think with the monsters instead of jailing them or locking them in the asylum.
Okay. And, moving on to psychology now, Bayo. Like,
yes,
you've had a big exposure to psychology. I've been very influenced by Jung and Hillman. Where are
yes.
you up to with psychology, and what do you think about it now?
So I continue to teach psychology, depth psychology. I speak a lot about trauma. I have my class on Monday with my PhD students in California. And I often explore the disciplinarity of psychology as implicated in coloniality, right? That psychology is not the study of human behavior. Basic psychology 101 definition is that it's the science of human behavior, it's the study of human behavior. I think instead that psychology is the manufacturing of human behavior, right? Just in the same way that zoos don't just keep animals. Zoos manufacture animals, right? And I'm speaking in a very real sense, animals, there's this famous account of a gorilla, or is it a chimpanzee, that has been in one zoo in the United States and is given psychoactive substances, drugs, psychiatric drugs, to keep it in the zoo, right? At this point in time, it's not just about keeping animals. They're actively creating the animals that would stay in the zoo, that would be comfortable with bars, right? I think in a way, this disciplinarity, this idea of the study of human behavior from an outside perspective, standing from a vantage point of objective, analysis or research, it's being contested, has been always contested by different kinds of insights. And I think that the ways that we think about human behavior and the world has to become more complex and complicated beyond the very anthropocentric ideas that are popular within psychological discourse. How we think and how we live and how we fall sick or how we maintain health are not just matters of the human body, they are matters of ecologies and other kinds of worlds. So I often describe myself as a recovering psychologist because I was trained and well trained and very well educated into these paradigms of thought. And I think my PhD, no, even my MSc was my breakout. I started with, never wanting to use I was naive, but I started with never wanting to use quantitative statistical research any longer. I was tired of SPSS. I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to hear stories. It was a huge deal for me to break out that way in the context of my training. And then my PhD, I sat with healers, shamans, the Babalawos, Yoruba healers from my culture, which was considered in my Christian university damning act of rebellion. But I've been gesturing towards these other realities ever since.
Yeah. I think the way Hillman put it is that, when you say what is ill, when you say what is healthy, you are saying what is ill, and then
Yes. Yes.
perhaps what is it, the inclination towards diagnosis and people adapting, and maybe that's hard for a lot of people to accept
It
now,
is. It is.
you know?
I mean, it risks something. By naming the worlds that we in the ways that we do, we risk, locking ourselves into patterns of behaving. I told you that my son is autistic.
Yeah.
We don't quite use and he wandered in here a while ago. We don't quite use that designation within our family.
Mm.
We understand he's different, but it's either we don't kind of locate autism within his brain or within his body. We kind of consider that a tendency or an intensity that we're all part of, right?
Mm.
In a world, um, in a world that if the world were shaped differently, if its politics were different, if its educational notions were different, if the idea of who gets to sit in a jury, to make judgments about someone, if it were different, then my son may possibly not be visible for diagnosis, right? So it's not, the issue is not locatable within him. It is an invisible thread that brings us all together in neurotypical clusters of becoming that names him this way and says he needs help or he needs attention because he doesn't fit in, right? So, yeah.
But the diagnosis can be a heavy burden,
And
uh,
also a heavy relief as well.
yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. 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 It's our way of explaining things, right?
Yeah.
That's it. We have a handle on it. Just having a handle on things makes things easier, but making things easier doesn't lend itself to transformation.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jung and Hillman, could you talk about those two for a while? What do you think about them?
I mean, Jung was the rebel child of Freud,
The runaway son.
the runaway son. And then Hillman was the runaway son from Jung,
Same
right?
thing happened. Yeah.
Maverick, and left his training to explore different ideas of the collective unconscious. I love that. I'm very given to Hillman and his framing of um, archetypal psychology and the image and the anima mundi. So while these two are still in conversation, even in their passing, around a world that extends beyond, or a world in which we must think about the mind as the psyche, as the world at large, that the mind is not this thing that is in here. The mind is all. The mind is shared, right? It's humans' attraction to stories and myth and folklore when he speaks about gods and goddesses, embedded in the furniture around us.
Yeah.
It's his invitation for us to work with that without trying to rehabilitate these monsters, to gentrify them, to drag them into the intensity of our designations, right? To say, as I'm sure Freud would have been livid, to read about these ideas, but to drag into interpretation, to say, what does that dream mean for me? Hillman was of the opinion that maybe it's not about you. Maybe interpretation is like diagnosis, a risk. And maybe you want to be drawn out to listen to what is happening there. So the imaginal, for me, connecting both thinkers is for me an invitation to explore, and not this navel gazing attempt to fix our place in the world and, entrench our habits of thought.
I think Hillman said psychology is about the stories of the soul.
Yes. Yes. The stories of the soul. I don't know that particular phrasing, but it seems like something Hillman would have said, right? Yes, of course, the stories we tell. I mean, I'd already loved reading Greek mythology and mythologies of different kind before I met Hillman, before I met him in his writing, but it engendered a deeper love, and his idea that maybe our work is to appreciate these realities, these worlds that exceed us, and maybe that's all there is to it. That feels like a very beautiful speculation and gift for us to consider, a practice in an open-ended universe. Yes.
Okay. Well, I just wonder if you were talking to some young people today and considering the events that have just happened, and you had to be a little bit how to, Bayo.
Yeah. How to. Okay. Let's see.
What would you say? What would you say is the main thing about this time of how to navigate through this time? Let's
do something. I don't do a how to.
No.
Very well. But I'm just going to play with it. It feels like something to play with. The conversation between us has been playful and joyful. So I'm going to play with that. It feels more like an invitation to play. How to. I mean, younger folk seem to be very, very alive to the intensities of this moment. They're having conversations and doing things that they're non-established bodies, and I mean that they're not positioned in spaces of established power. So it's easier for them to be open to other considerations of politics and economics and life and livelihoods on the planet. So they're taking up new vocations. They're asking new questions about jobs, education, ecologies, the Anthropocene, and they're very active. Thing is, these times are proliferating younger veterans at a faster rate, it seems. Like more younger people are becoming veterans fast because it seems they're witnessing the despair and the ironies, the absurdities of a world that encourages them to think and go beyond and do anything that they want, but do not come here. Don't come close. This is a tabernacle that is shielded off from you. But what if our questions lead us there? Get lost. It's that the absurdities of our time, pretends to encourage their venturing and yet resists their agency, in a manner of speaking. So I would say, nurture your failures. Nurture those spaces where you don't add up, that where you feel despair and grief, that's a place of power. Our neurotypical society might tell you to drown it out with entertainment, to drown it out with alcohol, or to just join the city hall since you can't beat it. Yeah. Or to accept, or to think of our power as over there, yonder. You have to cover a distance to be sacred. You have to go to Africa to feel enchanted. All of that, it seems we're in a paradigm of distances. That your despair is a homeopathic dose of a world that is wanting to be born. And your grief is a form of power. Find the others who are grieving with you and experiment with those moments. I'm not saying don't fight the power. I'm saying that often we become the power that we fight. If you lean on a wall long enough, you would take the shape of that wall. So are there divergent, dissonant, fugitive ways of cultivating responsibility that does not lock us into the carceral dynamics of struggle? Right? This is not about seeking a pure path. So find those lines of flight where desire traipses off fugitively into new kinds of terrains and territories. Embrace that. Share that. Embrace the bacchanal aesthetics of the carnival. Not the party, the carnival as a technology, right? The technology of presencing and absencing and being together and becoming together. Find a monster. Don't flatten it. Take it on a picnic. Sit with the monster in a picnic, right? This is not about you or your salvation or your righteousness or your pronouns or your sense of justice. This is about the growing impoverishment of a moral field that can no longer hold aloft the buoyant dreams and aspirations and agitations of our bodies. So the urgent work and slow work of our times is to lean into the cracks and then to be left to you and people like you around the world to lean into those cracks locally, wherever you are. That's my how-to.
That was lovely. And that is a good place to finish. And I want to thank you very much, Bayo. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Thank you.